Okay, for today we're going to be on in Unit 5, Lesson 4, and we're dealing all about inflation. Maybe you know what inflation is, maybe it's a topic that's new to you. Either way, we're going to cover all the things that you need to know moving forward with your final exam regarding inflation. We're going to go ahead and start off with our two essential questions, which are what causes inflation and how do we calculate it, and how does inflation harm both consumers and producers. Learning targets, remember this is how we're going to go ahead and achieve those essential questions. We're going to define what inflation is and how it is calculated, differentiate between hyperinflation and deflation, explain what causes inflation by comparing demand pull inflation with cost push inflation. There's also another term in there that you need to be familiar with called the cost price spiral, or the wage cost price spiral. Evaluate the impact of inflation on the economy is going to be our last one. First learning target up, define what inflation is and how it's calculated. So what is inflation? Inflation is basically the sustained rise in the level of prices or the sustained fall in the purchasing power of money. So some examples, every year when we cover this topic in my classroom, I have students ask me, is that why chips used to be 4 for $1 and now I can only get 2 for $1? That's pretty much right, because what's happened is things have become more expensive, and obviously when things become more expensive, the value of your dollar goes down. You can't buy as much with $1 right now that you could back 10 years ago. When I was your age, I could get a pack of gum for 25 cents, the big red or the juicy fruit. Candy bars were 60 cents. A bottle of pop was $1 plus 10 cents deposit. I'm lucky if I can get that for $1.50 at the store anymore. That's basically what inflation is in practice. Now, how are we going to measure those things? Well, that's through something called CPI and PPI. And the main tool that we use is CPI, and that stands for Consumer Price Index. I'm going to make sure I go through both of those, though. So Consumer Price Index, the way that we figure that out is I want you to think of when you go shopping online. When you go shopping online, you add something to the cart, and basically when you're done, you can see what the entire total of your whole purchase is. Maybe it's one thing, maybe it's 100 things. But basically what happens is the government goes ahead and goes shopping for things, theoretically. So they go out and they get things that are really expensive and they get things that are really cheap, just so that they have a wide range of variety of things. And so they put it in what's called the market basket. And so what they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and just leave it alone. So I bought all these different things. What's the price? Now, next year, I'm going to go ahead and figure out the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and buy those same goods and services, and I'm going to put them in the market basket again. Now, how does this year, the most recent market basket, compare to the previous year? If the prices have gone up, then inflation has occurred. Now, if something were to happen where goods and services become cheaper, then we would probably go ahead and say that deflation has occurred. Now, what is deflation? We'll talk about that later, too. Now, PPI is basically almost the same thing. It's a little maybe harder to wrap your head around because I got to use a term called wholesale pricing. Now, what is wholesale pricing? Back a long time ago, and the company still exists, I buy things from them, ABC Warehouse had an advertising campaign that was called The Closest Thing to Wholesale. And that was a good idea to figure out, that must be the cheapest price that I can actually get. So the way that wholesale works is basically this. When you go to ABC Warehouse or Best Buy or wherever you might buy electronics or appliances from, when they sell you that Samsung TV at, say, $1,000, now they didn't buy that TV for $1,000 from Samsung, because if they did, they wouldn't make any money. So what they do is they buy it for maybe $500 and then jack the price up to $1,000 so they can make a profit off of it. So in this case, the wholesale price would be whatever Best Buy bought that TV from the manufacturer before trying to sell it to you. That's why Best Buy, if you ever hear cut out the middleman, that's also one of the ways that you would explain that. So with CPI, we're just talking about basically going out and shopping. It's probably a little bit easier because you can just easily go and say, hey, how much is it to buy this and that, versus having to contact manufacturers and see exactly what wholesale price is. That's at least in my estimation, as to why CPI would be used more than PPI. But basically, it's the same formula. It's just a little different in terms of how you figure out the data for it. So, activity 1, determine what inflation is and explain how it is calculated using CPI and PPI, and make sure that you know the difference between CPI and PPI, because on final exams it's usually a question that is thrown in there. And if it's not on your final exam, it'll be on a test, assuming that you receive one on this particular topic. When you're ready to move on, after pausing the video, you can answer them, and then we're just going to go ahead and transition right into the next steps. So learning target 2, we're going to differentiate between hyperinflation and deflation. Hyperinflation occurs when inflation is getting out of control. It's natural for inflation to occur. We're not stressed out about it. But when it gets beyond 3%, it becomes too much. Now, hyperinflation just means it's rapidly growing out of control, as it says earlier. But some examples of that, Germany after World War I. Germany couldn't basically pay their bills. Now, remember, not trying to take you all the way back to World War I with 9th grade or anything, but essentially what happened was they had to pay for all the damages occurred in World War I. And they were doing okay for a while, a couple years, and then they basically couldn't pay anymore. And so one of the ways they tried to solve that problem was they printed a bunch of money. And if we look back at our previous lessons about demand pull inflation, when you just print money and then spend it, demand for goods and services gets out of control. So every year I have students ask me, Mr. No, why don't we just go ahead and print money and then we can go ahead and get out of debt as a nation? Well, this is exactly why. This is what Germany tried to do. So if I can recall back to when I teach European history, we cover this topic, and basically at that time, $3 or $4 in terms of German cash. I don't remember what their official term was back then, but their German version of the dollar, between 3 and 4 of those equaled $1 US. Once they started printing money, it grew to over 4 million German dollars equaled 1 American dollars. That's how little the money became in terms of value. They had people that basically would just run and take money and try and exchange it as fast as they could. That was their job. And so you might have heard the term, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. That's basically where we get that explanation from, because when you print money to try and get out of debt, that basically just turns it into worthless money. There's an even worse version of that you will maybe come across when you do some research later to try and answer one of the activities. I'm not going to get into it, but it's even worse than what happened in Germany. It happens with an African country, but that's as far as I'll get. So deflation is the opposite of inflation. The value of the dollar is going to increase, because you can buy more goods and services with the falling prices. Now, if demand is going way down, we know that when demand is going way up, like aggregate demand is going way up, that prices will also go up. And then we talked about back with our business cycles that when aggregate demand is going down, the prices should go down as well. So deflation is basically something that occurs during times of contractionary phase, or more importantly, or more visibly with the Great Depression. We had so many people out of work, and in order to try and sell goods and services, people would basically have to offer them at such a low price. And obviously that's good for you if you have money, but not a lot of people did back then. So hyperinflation, when money is basically becoming worthless because the prices of goods and services are just skyrocketing out of control. And then we have deflation, which is not exactly the opposite. It's not a drastic free fall of prices, but the fall in prices, which means that the value of your dollar is going to go up. So there are 2 extreme forms of inflation, which are hyperinflation and deflation. Now, create a definition of what each mean and research. Now, this is obviously something I used from a class that I had before. Use your phone. You should be able to use that in class. If not, then I guess you just skip this part. But basically, research a significant period of time these occurred in the world and the impact it had on the nation. Now, for the deflation one, we already covered that. I would prefer that you try and do the hyperinflation one and try not to use Germany, because obviously I already gave you the answer for it. But it is an interesting read with that African nation. Hopefully you can figure out which one I was referencing. When you're all set, move forward and get into the third learning target, which is explain what causes inflation by comparing demand pull inflation with cost push inflation. So there are two types of inflation, demand pull and cost push, and we're going to examine each one individually. First off, we have demand pull. Demand for goods and services has gone up. We pretty much are getting the idea that when demand goes up, so does everything else in terms of price. So why is demand going to go up? If the nation experiences an increase in income, that means people are going to buy more. And when people want to buy more, that means demand goes up. That also means that prices are going up. The other thing could be government spending. Now, that's through transfer payments and direct spending. That can go ahead and cause prices to go up as well. Go back to think of the Germany example. Germany was printing money left and right, and what happened to the prices of goods and services? It went out of control. But basically, again, anytime we have an increase in demand and it causes prices to go up, we refer to that demand pull inflation. So the two reasons: increase in income for people in a nation, and an increase in government spending can lead to that as well. Cost push, I gotta go back. Cost push, basically, demand pull and cost push, if you can remember the terms, if you just think about the terms, they basically explain themselves. When I talked about demand, basically what's causing the inflation, demand is pulling the price of goods and services up. Now we're with cost. Cost push, basically the cost of doing business is pushing the price up. So companies do not enjoy making less money, so normally they'll pass the cost on to you. So anytime it becomes more expensive, maybe I have to pay my workers more, maybe the government is passing on new taxes and regulations that make it more expensive for me to do business. Companies are not out there trying to just go ahead and make little money. Think of it, if you went into business for yourself, would you really want to be okay with, I'll just make a little bit less money? Absolutely not. You want to make as much money as you can. I'll give you an example that's relevant for my lifetime. So the minimum wage had gone up recently. I think it was the first year, maybe second year I'd been teaching at Chandler Park High School. And my wife and I were getting ready to go on vacation. It was right before the school year started. And so one of the things that we do is we stop at McDonald's for breakfast as we're getting ready to get out on the road. And on the window, this was back when dollar any size drinks were just starting off, and they were very popular. I said, due to the increased cost of doing business, we can no longer offer dollar any size drinks starting on this specific date. And it was like a couple days from then. And I started cracking up. My wife has no idea what I'm laughing about because, she doesn't have any idea what cost push inflation is. So I started explaining to her, I go, that day that they can't have dollar any size drinks anymore is the exact day that the minimum wage was supposed to go up. So the cost of doing business for them was going up. They were going to be forced to pay their employees more money. So as a result, they had to raise their prices to cover their costs. Let's take a look at it now. Back when you were in middle school, because you're in high school now, you probably could go anywhere and find a dollar menu. I don't see a dollar menu anywhere, really, at all. Maybe a restaurant here or there. I think Checkers has one. But when you go to McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's, they don't have a dollar menu anymore. They replace that with a value menu. And what has changed over time? The price of doing business. So because it's more expensive to do business, they're going to go ahead and raise the prices on that. Pretty soon you're probably going to see a $2 menu, but then that doesn't sound as good. Maybe that's why they say it's a value menu. Some other things we're going to talk about, some cost push inflation and the wage spiral. So when the people of a country experience an increase in wages, then the cost of production becomes more expensive. We've already covered that, so you should know it. When it becomes more expensive to do business, the natural reaction, obviously, is we're going to raise prices. So how is that related to the wage spiral? Well, when prices go up, then employees can't buy as much as they used to. So what's the natural reaction from an employee base? They want more money. So let's go ahead and assume that they are granted more money. So now what happens to the cost of doing business? Well, the prices are going to go up. And assuming that things remain the same, now that things are more expensive, what are employees going to want to do? Well, they're going to go ahead and want to raise. And basically, it just keeps going around in a spiral. One of the things we talk about in my class for minimum wage is you have people who, they got a minimum wage increase not too long ago, the one I just talked about 2-3 years ago. Then all of a sudden, that's not good enough. Now you have people out there arguing, I need $15 an hour for minimum wage. Well, let's assume that we actually give them $15 an hour for minimum wage. What's going to happen to the cost for all the other things that are going on in the United States? Well, they're going to go ahead and, well, obviously things at McDonald's or other places that pay their employees a minimum wage, that would have to increase too. Let's also take a look at the people who make $12, $13 an hour right now as well. Their employers would have to push their wages up to $15 to keep with minimum wage. So now the cost of everything becomes more expensive. And then what are the people making minimum wage going to start arguing about? I don't have enough money to live on. So then they're going to go ahead and argue. Maybe it's going to turn into a fight for 20. I don't know. But obviously, the better situation would be go ahead, get yourself some what we refer to as human capital in economics, and make sure you're not at that particular position to have to be in that situation. Okay. So here's our next activity. Bob just read an article on the price of goods and services going up due to demand pull inflation. What two scenarios, I've talked about them in this particular video already, could Bob have read about that would explain why this is occurring? When you're done with that, we have another one that's regarding cost push. And that's going to be this one. McDonald's buys beef from Mr. Norton's cattle ranch in order to make their hamburger patties. The workers at Mr. Norton's have been given a raise this week. How will this change in employee wages impact both Mr. Norton's and McDonald's? What type of inflation would this most likely be associated with? Obviously, it's a cost push, so you already know what that answer is. But exactly why would this be considered cost push would be more important to perhaps look at. Moving on to the next one when you're ready. Evaluate the impact of inflation on the economy. So that's I think that's our last learning target. So we've got decreasing value of the dollar, increasing interest rates, and decreasing real returns on savings. So let's go ahead and attack the first one. When things become more expensive, it basically results in your dollar being worth less. This really hurts people who are on fixed income as the cost of goods and services become more expensive, but their income doesn't grow. People who are typically on fixed income are people who might be on government assistance, or people who are retired, or people who receive Social Security, which is a different form of government assistance. But basically what happens is every year that you receive the same amount of money, so let's say I retire and every year I get $40,000 in retirement income. That's not a lot for those of you going, ooh, $40,000. It's really not. Okay. So this year I can buy $40,000 worth of goods and services. Obviously, next year, I'm going to have $40,000. How much can I buy? Easy answer, $40,000 worth of goods and services. But here's where the problem comes into play, is that I can't buy as many goods and services with my $40,000 next year as I could this year because the price has gone up. So basically what happens is every year that I am on that fixed income, I have to budget out the best I can because the price of things are going up, which means I can only buy the less. Let's get into increasing interest rates. So banks don't want to lose money when they loan it to people. Nobody wants to lose money. That's why you go into business. You don't sit there and go, I'm just going to give away all my money. No, they want to get back more money than what they loaned in the first place. So when inflation is high, that means that in order to protect themselves, they need to increase the interest rates associated with the loan, which makes it more expensive. Now, we've already discussed in previous lessons how high interest rates hurt the business cycle and the economy as well. So let's get into decreasing real return on savings. Decreasing real return on savings, basically, people are discouraged from saving. So the example we talk about is if you put $100 in a bank savings account that offered a 1% interest rate, and inflation grew, by the way, 1% interest rate is fantastic. I can't even come close to that at my bank. So if you can go ahead and find somewhere that has that, take care of it. So let's just say that inflation grows by 2%, then you would be able to buy less with your new total than when you originally put in $100. And obviously with that bell going off, we're going to be having some class exchange. Anyways, moving on to the next part. Activity 5, explain the 3 ways in which inflation impacts the economy. So it would be the 3 things I just mentioned. So when you can do those, move forward, and then we can finish up with the last 2 slides, which are going to be Can you do these 4 things without textbook, without notes, without even watching this video again? Can you do the 4 of them? Can you define what inflation is and how it's calculated? Can you differentiate between hyperinflation and deflation? Can you explain what causes inflation by comparing demand pull inflation with cost push inflation? Do you know both of them? Could you even tell me what the wage price spiral is sitting in there for the third one? Can you evaluate the impact of inflation on the economy? And if you can do all those, you should be able to do our essential questions, which were what causes inflation, how do we calculate it, and how does inflation harm both consumers and producers.